Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban on the Torah. Same problems in Israel as always, and we'll learn to fix them, and zchus of the chayalim and the chatufim, and a refuah shlema for everyone who needs one. Okay, big week of Rambans on Shmos. Let's start with the Ramban's Hakdama for Sefer Shemot. The Ramban, of course, wrote a Hakdama, an introduction to each of the Chumashim. He didn't really write one for Bereshis. The one he wrote for Bereshis is really for Kol HaTorah Kula. It's worth doing when you get a chance. But the one for Shmos kind of summarizes quickly Bereshis and then talks about Shmos. It's not that long. Says the Ramban, Hishlima katuv Sefer Bereshit shehu Sefer Hayitzira b'chidush ha'olam v'yitzirat kol notzar. Right? Bereshis is the book of creation. Now, the obvious question, which I think we discussed once before, but we'll touch on again now, is, okay, book of creation, that's part of Parshas Bereshis. What about the rest of the book? Says the Ramban, Ubimikrei ha'avot kulam shehem ki'inyan yitzira lizaram. Right, key line. Says the Ramban, no, it's Sefer HaYitzira, not just because the world was created, but because the avot, ma'aseh avot, yitzira labanim, all of their actions and all of their lives were creating a future for Klal Yisrael. So that's why it's Sefer Yitzira. Okay, all of it is telling us the future, which is also why it's important. And the Ramban at the end, at last week, pointed out that the avot, they're on their own. Right? The Shvatim didn't get buried in Marat HaMachpelah. Marat HaMachpelah is for the fathers of the nation, right? Abraham Lincoln may have been a great president, but he wasn't a father of the nation. He just historically didn't live then. Okay? Va'acharei sheishlim hayitzira hitchil sefer acher binyan hama'aseh haba min harimazim hahem. Now comes the sefer of the Galut and the Geula, which is a direct result of all the things that had happened in Sefer Bereshit. V'nityachet sefer ve'ele shmot binyan hagalut harishon hanigzar beferush ubigula mimanu. Right, Shmos is the exile and the redemption from it. V'lachein chazav yitchil bishmot yordei Mitzrayim. Right, all this to get to the point. Why does Shmos start with a list of the Yordei Mitzrayim? We already had the list in Sefer Bereshis. He says no. Af al pi shekvar nichtav zeh ba'avur ki yiridatam sham hu reishit hagalut k'mei azuchal. If you want the book to be self-contained, if you want it to be a book of the Galut and the Geula, you need to start with the Galut, right? All the great explanations, and they're lovely, and Madrashim and Rashis and whatever, they're all great, but says the Ramban, you don't need any of them. V'hineh hagalut einana nishlam ad yom shuva el mikomam. Now, the problem is, says the Ramban, wait, so when does the Galut end? When they return to their place. Now, if you're looking at, leaving Mitzrayim, so then the Sefer should end at Bishalach. So what's going on? So there I'm on a very important point. So you read the Sefer should end ad yom shuvam el mikomam vel malat avotam yashuvu. Ukishi yatsu mi Mitzrayim af al pi sheyatsu mi beit avodim adayin yachshavu golim ki hayu be'eretz lo lahem nevuchim bamidbar. Right? They got out of Mitzrayim and they sang Shir HaSayam, and where are they? There are millions of people in the desert. No place to go. No one knows where to go. No one knows what the story is. That's not the Geula. However, says the Ramban, Ukisheba'u el har Sinai va'asu hamishkan v'shav hakadosh baruch hu v'hishra shchinato beinehem. But when they got to Har Sinai and they got the Torah and they built the Mishkan, which for the Ramban happened right then, az shavu el ma'alat avotam shehu sod eloka ale ahalehem. Says the Ramban. At that moment, physically it's true, they didn't get to Eretz Yisrael yet. But in that moment, they took up the position, the mantle, they became representatives of Shechina on this earth. Veheim heim hamerkava. Okay, maybe a bit Kabbalistic, but literally, they are the people who are carrying HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name and his reputation is reflected in Klal Yisrael. That's what happens at Har Sinai. Va'az nechshavu geulim. At that moment, they are spiritually redeemed. It's true, physically they're not redeemed yet. But at that moment, when they take up the mantle of being Merkava l'Shechina, being the people in whom HaKadosh Baruch Hu is reflected in this world, they are redeemed. V'lachein nishlam hasefer hazeh b'hashlimo inyan hamishkan ubihiyot k'vod Hashem malei oto tamid. That's why the Sefer ends with the return of the Shechina, right? The Mishkan is the means. They build a Mishkan at Har Sinai. That's the means for God to return to Klal Yisrael. And at the very end of the Sefer, the pasuk says, "Ki anan Hashem al hamishkan yomam ve'esh tiyalai labo b'laynei kol beit Yisrael b'chol ma'asehem." Says the Ramban, that's the Geula. When God returns, when the Shechina returns to Klal Yisrael in some semi-permanent way, meaning the Mishkan wasn't intended to be permanent, but you could then go and see God whenever you wanted. It was a gift that God gave to Klal Yisrael. Therefore, says the Ramban, the Sefer HaGeula, the Sefer HaGalut, begins with the list of the Yordei Mitzrayim, even though we know the names and we know the number because it was done in Sefer Bereshis, but it needs to be part of the Sefer HaGalut. And the Sefer HaGeula, the second part of the Sefer HaGalut, is the Geula, ends with the building of the Mishkan and the return of the Shechina, because that's when you know that Klal Yisrael has returned to God's good graces and has returned to the status and the role of the Avot. Okay, let's keep going. Obviously, the story is the story, right? There's a very evil king, and what happens? The king speaks to the people. There's a lot of Paro talking to Mitzrayim. Okay, and the pasuk says, "Vayomer elamo hinei am b'nei Yisrael rava atzum mimenu hava nitchakema lo." Let's be smarter than them. Pen yirbev hayaki tikrena milchama v'nosaf kamu al soneinu v'nilcham banu v'olam min haaretz. Okay, so the Ramban wants to know, what's the chachma? Hava nitchakema lo. Okay, we're going to be so smart. And the Ramban really, like a tour de force, tells us the history of anti-Semitism. And what happened in Mitzrayim happened in Nazi Germany. Maybe it's happening again now. I don't want to take a position on that. I don't really know. Says the Ramban, Hava nitchak malo. Lo ra'a paro v'chachmei yoatzav lahakotam bechar. Right? Why doesn't this Paro kill them now? So he says, no, they don't decide to kill them. Ki tihiyeh b'gida gidola lahakot chinam ha'am asher bo ba'aretz asher ba'u ba'aretz b'mitzvat hamelach harishon. He says, you can't just kill innocent people. It doesn't work that way. The street, the regular Egyptians would rebel, right? We were invited by Paro, and now the next Paro is going to kill us. V'gam am haaretz lo yitnu rishut lamelech lasod chamas kazeh. The street won't allow that. So what does he do? Aval amar sheya'aseh derech chachma shelo yargishu Yisrael ki be'eva ya'aseh b'hem. Right? Paro's going to do it in a tricky way, so Bnei Yisrael won't realize that, one, life is getting worse for them, and two, the Egyptians will become accustomed to recognizing that the Jews are the source of all of their evils. Lakach, hitil bahem mas. First thing he did was impose a tax on the Jews. Why? Ki derech hagarim ba'aretz la'alod mas lemelech ki Moshe ba'bi Shlomo. He says it's not unusual. Shlomo HaMelech also taxed foreigners. So he did that first. Va'acharei kein tziva b'seite lamyaldot laharog hazicharim al ha'avnaim va'afilu hayoldot atzmam lo yodu bahem. Then he tells the midwives to kill all the male children, where if it works well, even the mothers who are giving birth don't know. They're in great pain. You know, the midwife takes a child, kills it, and says, okay, your child was a stillborn. Okay, va'acharei kein. So now he's also he's also generating hatred for the Jews. Va'acharei kein tziva l'chalamo kol haben hayilod hayaor tashlichuhu. Atem, you the people, v'ha'inyan shelo ratza litzavot l'sarei tabachim asher lo lahargam b'cherev hamelach. He didn't want to order the soldiers to do it. O sheyashlichem heimotam le'yaor, that the soldiers should throw them in the Nile. Right? That would be a problem. That would be recognized by all. They'd be condemned by the UN. Aval amar la'am, kasher yimtza kalachad yeled Yehudi yashlich oto ba'yaor. If they want to. if you hate Jews, if you recognize that Jews are doing all these evil things to our country, you have my permission to throw them into the Nile. Now, now let's say the father complains or the mother complains, you killed my son. Okay, bring witnesses and we'll deal with it. Obviously, they're never going to. Obviously, the Egyptians are supportive of this, but they have complete deniability. Right? Then the Egyptians started going into houses and looking for Jewish children to kill them. That's how Paro turned public opinion against the Jews. Right? It very much, at least part of this, sounds like Kristallnacht, sounds like things that the Nazis did. But maybe, again, there are parallels going on now. Paro is basically putting the power of the state at the disposal of those who hate Jews, but with complete deniability. Until, of course, there's no need to deny. Until you've made these people into the worst people in the world, and then, of course, you treat them that way. It's a painful reminder of how it went, but it's a genius insight of the Ramban that Hava Nitchak Malo is a program, an institutionalized program of anti-Semitism. Okay. Now, just a fascinating Ramban. It really shows the Ramban's insights into, or psychological insights. It's not really tied into anything significant. Says the Torah in Perek Bet Halacha Bet, Perek Bet Pasuk Bet, right? Vayelech ish mibeit Levi vayikach et bat Levi, they get married. Vatar ha'isha vateled bein, vatera oto kitovhu, vatitzbeneu shelosha yirachim. Okay, and she sees that the child is special, and so she hides him. Says the Ramban, Yadua, ki kol hanashim ohavot et bneihem, yafim v'sheinam yafim. Right? Every mother loves their infant child, whether they're beautiful or not beautiful. Every mother thinks their child is the most beautiful and the smartest and the greatest one ever. V'kulan titzapenu oto b'chol yicholtan ve'ein tzarich l'tana kitovu. Why does the Torah have to say vatera kitovu? Every mother would hide their child. Every mother loves their child and thinks their child is the insert Jewish jokes here, but every mother thinks their child is gifted. So says the Ramban, why does the Torah have to say that? He says, Aval, Perush hatova hazot shera'ata bo tov mechudash. No, she saw something really, really unique about him. V'chashva ki yera bo nes v'inatzel. And she was convinced that because he was so special, a miracle would take place. So she thought of all kinds of plans to make it work. There were all medrashim. We're not going to read the whole Ramban. There were all medrashim about, Miriam had been mitnabat, that Moshe would be, that her mother would give birth to Moshe Shel Yisrael, whether she saw the Shechina or whatever. Says the Ramban, no, Yocheved didn't just see Moshe Rabbeinu as a cute baby. Yocheved saw something really, really, unique about Moshe's birth. And therefore, the Torah points that out, and she tried to save him. Okay. Now, let's go on a tiny bit. Now we come to Moshe's exile and his time in Midian. And the Torah here has a unique description of the time. Says the Torah, Vayhi bayamim harabim hahem. And the Ramban wants to know, what is this strange phrase, Bayamim harabim hahem? And it gives the Ramban a chance to talk about something extremely significant, which I don't think we spend enough time focusing on. Says the Ramban, I'm picking up in the middle. What is Bayamim harabim hahem? It's not achar advarim ha'ela. What does it mean? Says the Ramban, Ulefi da'ati, kitam hakatuv hazeh yirmoz al hayamim shahayam Moshe borech mipnei paro. Says the Ramban, Vayhi bayamim harabim haim refers to this extended period of time when Moshe was on the run from Paro. And he'll explain. Ki be'emet binurav barach. When Moshe ran away from Paro, he was a kid. And here the ages really matter. Sha'katuv amar vayigdal Moshe vayetze elechav shahayazem miyad ka'asher gadal. The simple pshat is it means when Moshe grew up. Va'amar al da'ato V'higidu lo ki hu Yehudi. Right? Moshe grew up. They told him, his mother told him, his sister told him, it's hard to know who, that he was really Jewish. And he wanted to see how Egypt was really treating the Jews. On that day, he killed the Egyptian who was beating a Jew. The second day already, people told on Moshe, and he had to run away. Hine haya kiben shtem esrei shana. Says the Ramban. That's when Moshe was 12. There's also a medrash that supports this. But says the Ramban, he was 12 years old. Kasher yizkiu rabotenu, as the medrash says. Va'al kol panim, even if you're going to say, okay, he didn't grow up at the age of 12. Al kol panim, lo higia la'esrim, he was less than 20. Okay, why does this matter? Here's the point. Ube'amdo lifnei paro haya ben shmonim. But when he stood in front of Paro, we know that date, right? He was 80 years old, and that's how 40 years in the Midbar makes him 120 at the end of that period of time. He was 80. Im kain amad kimo shishim shana boreach milifnei Paro. It means for 60 years, he was running away from Paro, or a minimum of 60 years, maybe 68 years, right? Then we'll come back to that, because as we all know, that's 68 years of radio silence, meaning the Torah has nothing to tell us about that period of time. How do I know that? Says the Ramban. V'hakarov ki bisof hazman ba lemidyan v'nasat tzipora. The way I see it, says the Ramban, he didn't leave Egypt and run directly to Midyan, like the movie has it, and meet Tzipora at the well. And no, says the Ramban, he ran away. Ki kishayalo hadibur hazeh adayin lo holid mimeno rak benoha b'chor gershom. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to him at the sneh, he only has one son. Aval lo hizkir hakatuv b'brichato rak vayeshev be'eretz Midyan vayeshev ala be'er ki lo nidchadesh b'yamim ha'acherim inyan sheyitztarech hakatuv l'sapro. Says the Ramban, the Torah doesn't tell you anything about those 60 plus years because nothing happened. Now, I just want to point this out. It can't be that nothing happened. And the Ramban says this, but there's no period of time that's more hidden from us, the readers of Torah, obviously, and that we want more to understand, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest human being who ever lived. When Moshe Rabbeinu left Mitzrayim, and I say this with great respect, he wasn't yet the greatest person who ever lived. There's a development with Moshe Rabbeinu. And more than anything, we, the people who love Moshe Rabbeinu, who love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who the readers of the Torah, we want to know what happened. But it's not reported on the Torah. Much like I, and probably you once I tell you this, want to know how it is that Avraham Avinu met HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how Avraham Avinu came to recognize the first monotheist ever. Torah doesn't tell us. And I think the Ramban is hinting at in both places, and the idea for us is that if the Torah told us how Moshe Rabbeinu became Moshe Rabbeinu, if the Torah told us how Avraham Avinu became Avraham Avinu, that would be the one and only one way to do it. But since there's more than one way, the Torah intentionally hides from us what happened during those 60 years. Okay, we don't have time to go into all of it. Rav Moshe Lichtenstein wrote a sefer on this. It's called Sir Vitzon. It has some title in English as well. It's translated into English. Basically speculating about, okay, what was Moshe doing during the 60 years? There are medrashim about he was the king of Ethiopia and all these different things. But the point is, the Torah makes a conscious decision not to tell us. And I think, at least, the Torah's decision not to tell us is because there should not be one and only one way to recognize and come to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so says the Ramban, Moshe has to hide for 60 years. V'chein hadavar, he says, Ki haboreach min ha'malchut lo yit'akev be'ir moshav v'karav lo. If you're running away from the king, the most powerful person in the world, you're not going to run to the next city and hide there and live there for 60 years. Aval yivrach mi makom lemakom el eretz merchakim. You'll go from place to place, anonymously to distant lands. והנה עמד ימים רבים מתחבא ומתנכר מגוי אל גוי וממלכה לעם אחר. Moshe Rabbeinu spent, I don't know, 58 years running away from Paro. ובסוף הזמן בא למדיין והתעכב שם. Then eventually, after 58 years, I'm making that up specifically, that specific number, he comes to Midian. He's less nervous now. How, it's so many years later, how much can Paro be chasing after him? And he lives there. V'zet ta'am, a great diuk, vayeshev be'eretz Midian. Ki ra'ui haya sheyomar, vayelech al eretz Midian. Right? If he left Mitzrayim and went to Midian, it would have said vayelech al eretz Midian, not vayeshev. Aval ramaz shelo yashav be'ir ad bisof shabal eretz Midian v'sham yashav. The Torah is hinting he didn't really live any place till he came to Midian. And mipnei shehizkira kato brichato mipnei paro v'shivto b'Midian uba lahazkir miyad shehushav l'Mitzrayim u'mitzvato shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu haya nireh shehayu kol ha'ma'asim ha'ele ha'nizkarim na'asim miyad. Because the Torah wanted to get to the bottom line, it sounds like everything happened immediately. He left Mitzrayim. The next day he came to the well. He met Tzipporah. He married her. They had children. HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw him. But no, it took 60 years. Therefore it says, coming back to the point, Vayihi bayamim harabim hahem, that this period of time and the stories that are about to appear took place over an extended period of time. Okay, quick insight. Vayamas melch mitzvah vayanchu bnei Yisrael min ha'avodah vayizaku vatal shavatam el Elokim min ha'avodah. What is so special about the death of the Melech Mitzrayim? Why were the Jews so sad when the Melech Mitzrayim died? They should have hated Paro. The Ramban has an insight which very much reminds me of the Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, his take on the psychology of human beings. Says the Ramban, Valder chapshat minhag kol hane'evadim la'adon blial rasha shiyu mitzapim u'mechakim liyom moto. Generally speaking, right, people would be waiting for Paro to die. They should have made a kiddush when Paro died. However, v'ka'asher ra'u shemet hamelech he'anchu ma'od mimloch adam chanef marshia min harishon ki amru avda tikvatenu nigzarnu lanu. Says the Ramban, it's true. They wanted Paro to die. But when the next Paro took his place, and he was worse and more sadistic and more evil, the Jews lost hope. They completely lost hope because they saw things were getting worse, not better, right? Viktor Frankl's point in his book is that people set up a date, I'm going to get out of Auschwitz by Pesach. And then when nothing good happens at Pesach time, they give up hope. The Ramban's idea here is Bnei Yisrael literally gave up hope, which feeds in nicely to this idea that they weren't even crying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard their tefillos, even though their tefillos weren't to him. Vayishma Elokim et na'akatam, a na'aka, I think the Rav says, is like an animal's cry. But God chose to interpret it as a tefillah, and he answered the tefillah. How did he answer the tefillah? He called Moshe to the sneh. Okay, now, this is not the main point of the sneh, but this relates to the point we made before. Moshe comes and the malach cries out, Al tikrav halom, don't come any closer, shal na'alecha mi'al raglecha, ki hamakom asher ata omed alav ad mas kodeshu. Okay, this is Moshe Rabbeinu's first encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And says the Ramban, who really understood these things, Lo higia adayin lema'alato hagidola b'nevuah. At this point, Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't yet Moshe Rabbeinu. Obviously, he'd grown over the 60 years, but he wasn't yet Moshe Rabbeinu. How does he know it? Ki bahar Sinai nigash el harafel asher sham ha'elokim. Right? At Har Sinai, he went all the way up to the top, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And here the Malach is warning him from getting closer. More than that. V'chein inyan hastarat panim. Right? Vayastem Moshe panav ki aremi habit el elokim. He was afraid, says the Ramban. He had never met HaKadosh Baruch Hu before. This was the beginning. The Medrash has a frame that Moshe was tiron b'nevuah. He was a trainee in prophecy. He became who he became. But at this point, he wasn't. Sha'adayin lo Allah l'mashen emar bo utmunat Hashem yabit. right? Moshe Rabbeinu, we don't really think of biblical figures, and it's to our detriment that we don't, as developing, right? We think of Avram as being Avram at the end of his days, and Yitzchak and Yaakov and all these people. But the Ramban points out from time to time, and particularly with respect to Moshe Rabbeinu, no, he grew over time. He became something, right? He wasn't that way when he was 20, and he wasn't that way yet when he was 80. His relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu needed to go through a whole process, and it started here, where at first he's afraid. Vayastem Moshe panav. He's afraid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's overwhelmed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as all of us would be. Eventually, he becomes the Moshe Rabbeinu, who becomes peh el peh adaber bo b'marev v'lo b'tmunot. Okay, so that's an important insight. Now, let's see what we have time for. Go to pasuk Yudchet. We're still at the Sneh. The Sneh takes a long, long time, and the pasuk says, "V'shama'u l'kolecha." They're going to listen to you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, they're going to listen to you. How does HaKadosh Baruch Hu know? What's the secret? Why is it that they're going to listen to him now, and maybe they didn't listen to people before? V'sham'u l'kolecha, says the Ramban, me'alehen mikevan shetomar lahem lashon ze miyad yishmu l'kolecha. Right? Pakod yifkod elokim etchem. When you use that language, those magic words, says the Ramban, they're going to believe you. Shekvar siman ze masur biyadam Yaakov u'Yosef. Shebelashon hazen nigalim. Because they already know from Yaakov and Yosef that that's the lashon of the Gula. Amar lahem ve'elokim pakod yifkod etchem. Yosef amar lahem pakod yifkod elokim etchem, etc. That's Rashi. And the Ramban more or less agrees. However, the greatness of the Ramban, a common sense question, and all of you would have thought of it also. V'yesh alecha lishol. Right? And I think when the Ramban does common sense questions, he often uses the phrase V'yesh alecha lishol. Everybody should ask this question. Uminayim lahem sheyaminu. What's the proof? Shema shama Moshe b'misarat hazot kimotam. Maybe Moshe heard that the Geula is going to come with the words of Pakod Yifkod, like every single other person in Klal Yisrael heard. What kind of proof is it that Moshe is the authentic Moshiach Shel Yisrael if everybody knew it? V'yesh lomar kach, kiblu miyosef sheshama mipi anavi, etc., etc. So says the Ramban, the answer is as follows. He quotes a medrash. Rav Chama bar Chanina, ben shtei mesrei nitlash Moshe mi beit aviv. Lama. Why did Moshe have to go away when he was 12? It's going to tie all this together. She'ilu gadal beveit aviv uva v'amar lahem hama'asim. If he grew up in his father's house and he told them, Pakod yifkod, lo hayu ma'aminim bo, shayu omrim aviv misaram lo, right? No, he heard it from his father. It doesn't make him the authentic Moshiach Shel Yisrael. But since he went away at the age of 12 and he only came back at the age of 80, and he didn't grow up in his father's house, says the Ramban, when Moshe tells them Pakod Yifkod, he must have heard it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he was away all those years. He never heard it from his parents. He wasn't part of the Masorah, and therefore it was proof of the authenticity of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, so we saw a number of, probably more than the usual number of Rambans today. We saw the Hakdama, that the Sefer Agula ends when HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes, lives in the Mishkan and chooses to be part of Klal Yisrael, who are a reflection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shechina. Havanit Chakmalo, Paro giving a master lesson in anti-Semitism and how you can turn people against the Jews and how you can do things that are not, at least they don't appear to be state-supported, and you don't have to worry about people criticizing you. Sipora loving Moshe. All mothers love their kids. All mothers think their kids are the most beautiful, wonderful, cutest things in the world. No, it was more than that. She saw something, Kitovhu, she saw something in Moshe that made her believe that he would survive even being put in the Nile. Vahi bayamim harabim hahem. What does it mean? It's talking about the extended period of time that Moshe was away from Klal Yisrael, 60 plus years, which the Torah does not describe. A big, big discussion in Parshanim. Why doesn't the Torah tell us anything? The Ramban says nothing significant happened. but then the Ramban gives it away. When he says, Al Tikrav Halom, that when Moshe goes to the Sinai, he wasn't yet Moshe Rabbeinu and Moshe had to grow, the Ramban acknowledges Moshe Rabbeinu, like every other human being, although probably much better than every other human being, grew from the experience, from being away, from seeing Klal Yisrael. There are many, many books and many articles that deal with it. And the last Ramban that we didn't get to do today is Shlachna B'yad Tishlach. The Ramban says literally, Moshe Rabbeinu says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, any other person in the world would be more worthwhile and more appropriate to send as the Shliach Hashem, not me. Why, says the Ramban? That's why Moshe was Anav Mikol Adam Asher Al Pnei Adama. Yashkach to everybody. Have a great, great week and a great Shabbos, and I'll see you next week.